Okay, so I want to tell a story today, and that story is about how one of my aunts in my family do not talk to me because they think that I, at the age of 16, did something with her partner at the time. And I have been a nervous wreck to talk about something like this and to tell this story.
Some stories don't start with a crime. They start with a whisper, a look, a sudden change in how people treat you. And by the time you realize what's happening, your entire life has already been rewritten by someone else. Because sometimes the most painful betrayal doesn't come from strangers. It comes from family. And sometimes the deepest wounds aren't physical. They're emotional. They're silent. They live in the spaces where truth should have been spoken. But WASN single quotes today. I'm telling a story I've carried for 16 years. A story about accusation, about silence, about being a child, and being blamed for something that never should have happened. This is not a story about drama. This is a story about survival. Hi, my name is Ashlee, and before I begin, I want to say something clearly. This video is not meant to expose anyone. I'm not here to attack. I'm not here to shame. I'm here because healing requires truth, and because I know I'm not the only person who has lived through something like this, where you were too young, too vulnerable, too powerless. And yet, somehow, you became the one blamed. So if you've ever been silenced, if you've ever felt like your voice didn't matter, please stay with me, because this story is for you too. I was 16 years old, still a kid, still trying to figure out who I was. That summer, my sister and I were staying with one of my aunts. It was supposed to be normal. Family time, a break from life. At the time, my aunt had a partner, and as far as I knew, everything was fine. Nothing felt dangerous. Nothing felt inappropriate. It was just family. Until it wasn't. Because sometimes you don't realize you're in the middle of something wrong. Until years later, after the summer ended, we went home. Life moved on, or at least I thought it did, but one day my stepmother was going through my phone and she found something. A conversation, messages, words that immediately raised questions. She showed my dad called my aunt, and suddenly was sitting in the middle of a storm I didn't understand. I remember the panic, the confusion, adults speaking in fragments. In implication, like I was supposed to know what I was being accused of, but I didn't. I was 16, and all I knew was that something felt wrong at first. My aunt was kind. She said she was sorry. She made it feel like she understood that I was young, that I was vulnerable, that if something uncomfortable had happened, it wasn't something I should have ever been pulled into. For a moment, felt safe. I thought, okay, my family sees me as a child. My family will protect me. This will pass. But healing doesn't always happen immediately. Sometimes the wound just gets buried. And buried wounds don't disappear. They rot. Years went by and slowly something changed. Phone calls became distant. Family gatherings felt colder. My aunt's warmth faded into something else. Suspicion, silence, and one day I realized she didn't believe I was innocent anymore. Somewhere along the way, story shifted in her mind, and instead of seeing me as a child, she began seeing me as blame, as if I had initiated something, as if I had done something wrong. And I cannot explain the kind of pain it is to grow up knowing a family member looks at you like you're guilty of something you never did. Because here's what no one wants to say out loud. If a 16-year-old is involved in anything inappropriate, there is an adult involved. There is power involved. There is imbalance involved. So why? Why did the blame drift toward me? Why was the question not, how could an adult allow this? But instead, what did you do? That was the betrayal. That was the moment love became conditional. That was the moment my worth began to fracture. And when you're young, you internalize everything. You start questioning yourself. Was I too friendly? Was I too naive? Did I smile too much? Did I say something? Wrong. You shrink. You become smaller. You monitor your existence. Because you think, if I can just disappear, maybe no one will accuse me again. And that kind of self-erasure follows you into adulthood. It becomes part of your identity. Fast forward, I'm 32 now, and I'm sitting in therapy, talking about something I thought I had moved past. And my therapist says something that breaks me. You never should have been put in that situation. And suddenly, I start crying because no one had ever framed it like that. It was always, what happened? What did you say? What was in the messages? But never, why was a child even in a position where this could occur? That sentence changed everything because it removed shame and replaced it with clarity. For a long time, I thought this was something specific, something swept under the rug in certain communities. But then I moved. I left the US. I lived in Paris. Now I live in Barcelona. I traveled the world and I realized this happens everywhere. Across cultures, across countries, across families. Children are placed in impossible situations and then blamed for surviving them. And because it's uncomfortable, people stay silent. When I left the US in 2014, part of me thought I was chasing adventure, but another part of me was running from unresolved pain, running from family tension, running from a version of myself still stuck at 16, confused, ashamed. Silenced. Distance gave me space. Space gave me clarity. And clarity forced me to confront what I buried. And now, I'm at a point in my life where I want children. And I ask myself, if I have a daughter, would I want her carrying this kind of shame? Would I want her believing she caused something she never asked for? No. So why am I still carrying it? Why am I still protecting everyone else's comfort at the expense of my truth? That's when I knew it was time to speak. And in the next section, we're going deeper into what healing actually looks like. Into confronting family, into reclaiming your voice, and into finally letting go of something that was never yours to carry. There's something else I haven't said yet, something that makes this story even heavier. My sister passed away, and grief does something strange to unresolved trauma. It magnifies it, because when someone who shared your childhood disappears, you lose the only other person who fully understands the atmosphere you grew up in. She was there that summer. She knew the energy. She felt the shift, and when she passed, it felt like the last witness to that version of my life was gone. There's a loneliness in that. A loneliness that makes you realize if I don't tell my truth, it might disappear with me. I wasn't just grieving my sister. I was grieving the version of my family I thought I had. I was grieving safety. I was grieving innocence. And I was grieving the relationship with my aunt that would never be the same. Because once someone looks at you through the lens of suspicion, it's hard to go back. Even if nothing was proven, even if nothing truly happened, the seed of doubt is enough. And I felt it every holiday, every silence, every unanswered message. Here's what people don't understand about being blamed for something you didn't do. You carry two weights. The first is confusion. The second is responsibility. Responsibility for other people's emotions. Responsibility for their heartbreak. Responsibility for their embarrassment. Responsibility for their shattered relationship even. If you were just a child, I felt responsible for my aunt's pain, and that's a heavy thing for a teenager to carry, because children are wired to protect love, even when love isn't protecting them. Let's talk about something uncomfortable. Power. When you are 16 and there's an adult involved in anything even slightly inappropriate, there is a power imbalance. There is authority. There is age. There is experience. And whether something crossed a clear line or not, the responsibility never rests on the minor. But families don't always want to confront that reality, because confronting that reality forces hard questions. Questions like, how did this dynamic even form? What boundaries were missing? Who should have intervened? And instead of sitting in those questions, sometimes it's easier to redirect the discomfort toward the youngest person involved. What made it even more surreal was watching certain public conversations happen in media around similar topics, seeing people condemn adults in situations involving minors, seeing outrage, seeing moral clarity, and thinking, so why was my situation treated differently? Why was I not extended that same clarity, that same protection? It created this cognitive dissonance, like the world understood the principle, but my family couldn't apply it internally. And that disconnect cut deep. When I moved to Europe, I told myself it was adventure. Paris felt romantic, new language, new friends, new identity. But if I'm honest, it was also escape. Because when you leave everything behind, you can reinvent yourself. You can become the girl who isn't defined by accusation. You can become the woman who feels worthy. For the first time in years, I wasn't shrinking. I wasn't overthinking every interaction. I wasn't monitoring my smile. I was just living. And slowly, I started meeting myself again. But healing isn't linear. Years into living abroad, this topic resurfaced in therapy, and this time I didn't brush it away. My therapist asked me, what would it look like to defend 16-year-old you? And I froze, because I had never defended her. I had spent years explaining her, minimizing her, trying to make her less threatening, less problematic, less misunderstood, but defending her. That felt radical. That felt confrontational. That felt scary because defending her meant challenging the narrative, and challenging the narrative meant risking more rejection. Let's talk about fear. The fear of being annihilated online. The fear of family backlash. The fear of being misunderstood. Again, the fear that people will twist your words. The fear that someone will say, you're exaggerating. You're playing the victim. You're remembering it wrong. When you've already had your reality questioned once. Speaking up feels dangerous. But silence is heavier. Silence ages you. Silence keeps you 16 forever. And I refuse to stay 16 in this story. Here's where healing becomes complicated, because I don't see my aunt as a villain. I see her as someone who was also hurt. Someone blindsided. Someone forced to confront a reality she didn't want to see. And pain makes people defensive. Pain makes people irrational. Pain makes people search for control. Blaming me may have felt like control. It may have felt easier than confronting a deeper betrayal. And I can hold that understanding without sacrificing my own truth. That's growth. That's adulthood. That's therapy. I'm getting older. Now, I want children. And I ask myself, if my daughter came to me with something uncomfortable, what would I do? Would I protect my image? Or would I protect her? Would I silence her? Or would I listen? And the answer is obvious. I would protect her. Without hesitation. And that realization makes one thing clear. The cycle stops with me. The silence stops with me. The blame stops with me next year. I plan to go back to the United States, not to fight, not to accuse, but to close a chapter, to look at my aunt as a grown woman, and speak calmly, clearly, without shame. To say, I was a child. I never intended harm. I never orchestrated anything. And I deserved protection. That conversation might not go perfectly. It might not fix everything, but it will. Free me. Because sometimes closure isn't about their response, it's about your courage. If you're watching this and you've experienced something similar, I want you to hear this clearly. You did not ask for it. You did not orchestrate it. You did not deserve it, even if you responded imperfectly, even if you didn't know how to set
boundaries.
Even if you froze, even if you didn't tell someone immediately, you were navigating something beyond your developmental capacity. And survival is not guilt. One of the most powerful things I've learned living abroad is discovering my own values, separating who I am from who I was told I was. rebuilding worth from scratch, because shame distorts identity. It tells you, you are trouble, you are dangerous, you are inappropriate. But healing tells you, you are worthy. You are allowed to take up space. You are allowed to be heard, and you are allowed to outgrow the narrative someone placed on you. This story isn't about scandal. It's about reclamation. It's about giving 16-year-old me a voice. It's about making sure if I ever have children, they grow up knowing their truth matters. In the final section, I'm going to talk about what letting go actually looks like. About forgiveness, about boundaries, about what happens after you speak, and about why telling this story now is the beginning of something new. Healing is not a straight line. It's not a clean ending. It's not a movie moment where everything suddenly makes sense. Healing is messy. Healing is remembering something you tried to forget and choosing to face it. Anyway, healing is waking up one day and realizing I've been carrying shame that was never mine. And for a long time, I thought healing meant pretending it didn't hurt. I thought healing meant moving on. But therapy taught me something different. Healing means integration. Healing means taking the broken pieces of your story and holding them with compassion, not denial, not silence. Compassion. There's a version of me still frozen at 16, still confused, still wondering why love disappeared, still wondering why no one said, "You're safe. You're not to blame. You're just a child." And sometimes, in therapy, I imagine her, I imagine sitting beside her, I imagine taking her hand, and I imagine telling her what she needed to hear. This was never your fault. You didn't ask for this. You didn't deserve this, eh? You are still worthy of love. That's where healing begins, when you become the adult you needed back then. People love to throw around the word forgiveness. Forgive and forget. Family is family. Let it go. But forgiveness is not permission. Forgiveness is not pretending. Forgiveness is not erasing accountability. Forgiveness is simply releasing yourself from carrying poison in your body. Forgiveness can exist alongside boundaries. I can forgive my aunt for being hurt. Without accepting blame, I can forgive the silence. Without returning to it, I can love my family and still demand truth. That is adulthood. That is healing. For years, I thought peace meant staying quiet, keeping the family comfortable, not rocking the boat, but peace built on silence. It's not peace, it's suppression. Real peace comes from authenticity. Real peace comes from saying, this happened, this hurt, and I deserve to be whole, even if others don't understand, even if others don't agree. Wholeness is not dependent on their validation. Wholeness is yours. That's why I'm speaking now. Not because I want sympathy, not because I want attention, but because silence thrives in secrecy, and secrecy is where shame grows. I know there are people watching this who have lived through something similar. A family member who didn't believe you. A situation that was twisted. A childhood moment that stole your voice. And I want you to know something. You are not alone. This is bigger than one family. This is generational. This is cultural. This is global. And it ends when we speak. Sometimes I imagine the conversation. I imagine walking into a room, not as the scared teenager, but as the grown woman I am now. I imagine sitting across from my aunt and calmly saying, I need you to understand something. I was 16. I was a child. Whatever you think happened, the responsibility could never have been mine. I deserved protection. I deserved belief. I deserved care. And maybe she cries. Maybe she denies. Maybe she stays silent. Maybe she finally understands. But regardless, I speak because my voice matters. Even if it comes 16 years late, truth doesn't have to be loud. Truth doesn't have to be cruel. Truth can be soft and still be powerful. Truth can be spoken with empathy, still be firm. I don't want revenge. I want release. I want closure. I want to stop living with an invisible weight on my chest. And sometimes closure isn't reconciliation. Sometimes closure is simply saying, I know what happened, and I know who I am, and I refuse to carry shame anymore. So many families survive by not talking. They survive by sweeping, by burying, by pretending. But silence is not survival. Silence is a slow death. It kills trust. It kills safety. It kills childhood. And if I have children, especially daughters, I want them to grow up in a world where truth is allowed, where discomfort is faced, where protection is instinct, where blame does not fall on the most vulnerable. That is how cycles end, not with perfection, but with courage. If you are watching this, you've been that person, the one who stayed quiet, the one who was blamed, the one who felt unworthy. I want to speak directly to you. You did not ask for it. You did not deserve it. You were navigating something beyond your age, and whatever happened, your survival is not guilt. Your silence was not consent. Your confusion was not wrongdoing. You are worthy, right? Now, as you are, I've learned that healing is not about rewriting the past. It's about reclaiming yourself from it. I've learned that family can be complicated and love can be conditional. But your worth is not. I've learned that therapy is not weakness. It is bravery. And I've learned that the moment you speak, even trembling, even afraid, you take your power back. So this is me, taking my power back, not with anger, not with scandal, but with truth, with softness, with strength, with the courage to say, I was a child, I was not to blame, and I deserve peace. Thank you for listening. Thank you for holding space. And if you've ever been silent, if you've ever carried something heavy, I want you to know you are not alone, and your voice matters. If this story resonated with you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. Leave a comment below with one word: healing. And if you have your own story, tell it when you're ready, at your pace, in your way. Because silence protects no one. Truth sets us free. And I'm so grateful you are here. I love you, and I'll see you in the next video. There's something about trauma that people don't always understand. It doesn't stay in the past. It doesn't remain neatly in 1 year of your life. It echoes. It revisits you when you least expect it. Sometimes it shows up in a smell, a tone, a voice, a family gathering, a question someone asks that feels too sharp. And suddenly, you're not 32 anymore. You're 16 again, standing in the same confusion, feeling the same panic, trying to make sense of something you never should have had to carry. That's what unresolved pain does. It time travels. I remember the days after my dad confronted the situation. I remember how quiet the house felt, how adults whispered instead of speaking, how my name suddenly carried weight. I remember wanting someone to sit down beside me and say, tell me what you feel. Tell me what happened. But instead, it felt like everyone was speaking around me, not to me. And when you're 16, you don't always know how to demand clarity. You just absorb the atmosphere. And the atmosphere told me, something about you is wrong, even if no one said it out loud. That's the thing about implication. It doesn't need proof. It doesn't need facts. It only needs discomfort. And discomfort is powerful. People would rather believe a distorted story than confront an unbearable truth. Because if the truth is an adult behaved inappropriately, then that truth breaks everything. It breaks relationships. It breaks identity. It breaks the illusion of safety. So instead, the story becomes easier. The story becomes the girl did something. The girl caused something. The girl is the disruption. And suddenly, the child becomes the scapegoat. Therapy helped me understand something that was painful but important. Sometimes, blame is a defense mechanism. When someone is betrayed, they look for a way to regain control. And blaming the vulnerable person can feel like control, because blaming the adult means confronting something monstrous. It means admitting, I was with someone capable of harming a child. That's unbearable. So the mind twists it, REDIRECTS. It says it must have been mutual. It must have been initiated. It must have been complicated. But a child is not complicated. A child is a child, and the responsibility is never equal. This didn't just affect my teenage years. It shaped my adulthood. It shaped how I moved through relationships. It shaped how I trusted men, how I trusted women, how I trusted myself. Because when your boundaries are blurred young, you spend years learning what should have been taught early. That attention is not love. That discomfort is not normal. That silence is not safety. I became hyper-aware, hyper-vigilant, always scanning for danger, always afraid of being misunderstood. Again. And that's exhausting. That's what trauma does. It turns your nervous system into a guard dog. Even when you're safe, family is supposed to feel like home. But when love becomes conditional, home becomes unfamiliar. I started feeling like an outsider in my own bloodline, like I was tolerated, not embraced, like my presence carried tension. And there is a grief in that, because it's not just losing a relationship, it's losing belonging. It's losing the ease of being loved without suspicion. It's losing the right to exist without explanation. And that grief is quiet. But it is lifelong. I wish I could tell you I always knew. I was innocent. But trauma doesn't work like that. There were moments I doubted myself, not because I did something, but because I was so young, so confused, so afraid, that my mind searched for reasons. Maybe I was too friendly. Maybe didn't shut something down fast enough. Maybe I didn't understand what was happening. And then shame creeps in. Shame says, if you were blamed, maybe you deserved it. But shame is a liar. Shame is not truth. Shame is what happens when society refuses to protect children. One of the most surprising parts of sharing this story has been realizing how many people relate. Friends have opened up to me quietly. People have messaged me saying, this happened to me too. And it's heartbreaking that we can bond over pain. But it's also powerful because community breaks. Isolation. Community reminds you, it wasn't just you. You weren't uniquely broken. You were a human being navigating something impossible. And the fact that so many people stay silent is exactly why these stories must be told. There is a culture of silence in so many families, not just one community, not just one country, everywhere. The unspoken rule is, don't embarrass the family. Don't expose the truth. Don't disrupt the peace. But peace built on silence is false peace. It's a performance. And children suffer for that performance. Children grow up believing their pain is inconvenient, that their truth is dangerous, and that is how cycles continue. Living in Europe gave me something priceless: space to discover who I am outside of family narratives. I found my own values, my own identity, my own voice. I stopped living for approval, stopped shrinking, stopped trying to be palatable, and slowly I began to feel something unfamiliar: freedom. Not because the past disappeared, but because I stopped letting it define my worth. Sometimes I think about my future children, and I imagine telling them, you can always come to me, no matter what. You will never be blamed for being vulnerable. Will never be silenced for telling the truth. That's the mother I want to be. And that's why I have to heal now, because unhealed trauma doesn't vanish, it transfers, and I refuse to pass this weight down. The cycle ends here, with me. So now the question becomes, what happens after you speak? What happens after you reclaim your voice? What happens after you stop protecting silence? In the final section, I want to leave you with something more than pain. I want to leave you with tools, with hope, with a vision of what life looks like on the other side of shame, because healing is possible and you deserve it. So what happens after you tell the truth? Nothing explodes. The sky doesn't fall, but something shifts inside. You daughter is a strange quiet that comes after honesty, not silence, but stillness, like your nervous system finally exhales, because carrying a secret is heavy. Carrying shame that doesn't belong to you is heavier. And when you set it down, you realize how tired you were. Trauma doesn't just live in memory, it lives in the body, in tight shoulders, in shallow breathing, in awareness, in the way you brace yourself for conflict. When you've been blamed unfairly, your body learns to anticipate danger even when there is none. And one of the most powerful parts of my healing has been learning to feel safe again. Safe in conversations, safe in relationships, safe in my own skin. That doesn't happen overnight. It happens slowly, through therapy, through self-reflection, through honest conversations, through choosing people who choose you back. I want to share a few things that helped me move forward, not as advice, not as a prescription, just as possibilities. First, therapy, not just talking about the event, but unpacking the belief systems that formed because of it. The belief that I was unworthy, the belief that love could disappear overnight, the belief that I was responsible for other people's emotions. Those beliefs needed to be dismantled. Second, boundaries. Learning that I can love someone and still protect myself. Learning that distance is not cruelty, it's clarity. Third, community, safe conversations with people who understand. People who don't rush you. People who don't minimize your experience. Healing happens in safe spaces. Fourth, self-compassion, not asking why didn't I handle it better, but asking how was I surviving at the time. That shift changes everything. Maybe you're watching this and you've never told anyone. Maybe your story is still locked inside you. Maybe you're afraid of what will happen if you speak. And I want to say this gently. You don't owe the world your trauma. You don't owe social media your story. You don't owe anyone disclosure, but you owe yourself honesty, even if it's just in a journal, even if it's just in therapy, even if it's just whispered in prayer. Your truth deserves space somewhere, even if it's private. There is a difference between blame and responsibility. Blame says, you caused this. Responsibility says, this was not yours to carry. Children are not responsible for adult behavior. Children are not responsible for emotional manipulation. Children are not responsible for inappropriate dynamics. Even if you responded imperfectly, even if you were confused, even if you froze. Freezing is survival. Confusion is developmental. Reality and survival does not equal guilt. If I could speak directly to my aunt right now, I would say this. I understand you were hurt. I understand you were shocked. I understand you may have felt betrayed. But I was 16 and I needed protection, not suspicion. I needed care, not distance. And I forgive you for being human, but I will not carry blame that isn't mine anymore. That's the difference now. I no longer absorb what doesn't belong to me. So many families pass down silence like inheritance. Don't talk about it. Keep it in the family. Move on. But what if the true inheritance should be honesty? What if the legacy we leave our children is emotional safety? What if we normalize uncomfortable conversations? That's what I want. Not perfection, not spotless history, but emotional courage. Because cycles don't end with avoidance. They end with awareness for a long time. This story felt like it defined me, like it lived at the center of my identity. But it doesn't anymore. It's a chapter, not the whole book. I am more than that summer, more than that accusation, more than that silence. I am a woman who rebuilt herself, who crossed oceans, who found her values, who learned to love herself deeply, and who refused to let shame win. That is who I am now. And I want to say something important. This conversation isn't just for women, it's for men too, because boys are silenced, boys are blamed, boys are told to be strong, and vulnerability is dismissed. If you are a man who experienced something similar, your story matters, your pain matters, and your healing matters. Silence doesn't discriminate, it harms everyone. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It means releasing the emotional charge. It means choosing peace over replay. It means refusing to let the past narrate your present. And I feel lighter now. Not because the story changed, but because my perspective did. I see my younger self with compassion. I see my family with complexity. And I see my future with hope. That is freedom. 16 years is a long time to carry something, but it's not too long to heal. It's not too late to speak. It's not too late to reclaim your voice. If anything, the timing makes it more powerful, because now I speak not as a scared teenager, Kate, but as a grounded woman, and that changes everything. So this is my story, not perfect, not dramatic, not scandalous, just honest. A story about being a child, being misunderstood, being silenced, and choosing years later to rise anyway. If you've been silent, I see you. If you've been blamed, I believe you. If you're still healing, you are not broken. You are becoming. If this resonated with you, leave a comment with the word becoming, because that's what healing is. Not erasing the past, but becoming someone stronger because of it. Share this with someone who needs permission to speak. And if you're on your own healing journey, take your time, move gently, but don't stay silent forever. Your voice matters, your story matters, and you deserve peace. Thank you for listening. I love you, and I'll see you in the next chapter.